thing that we're going to talk about today is something called translate. And translate is a function that allows us to change properties of our sketch's coordinate system. This comes in really handy when we want to do things like scale and rotate things that we draw on screen. So I'm going to just quickly talk about like conceptually what's going on here, and then we'll get into looking at some code. So when here, if we imagine our normal processing, wow, I've got a really bad handwriting here, huh? 2, 3, 4. So if we imagine our normal processing, like grid of our canvas, the origin point 0, 0, and then as we move across, the number increments, and as we move down, the number increments on the y-axis. And so, we can say like draw something here, right? Then we've got a square there. Now, if we ever want to do something like, say, for example, rotate an object, the way that P5JS works is everything gets centered around the origin point. So any rotations would happen from 0, 0, which then means that like this ellipse right here would then rotate. So it would be like whoop, go up off the screen this way. So what we want to do is we want to be able to change where this origin point lives inside of our sketch. And the way we do that is through this thing called translate. And what this allows us to do is change this origin point and move it somewhere else so that 0, 0 exists in a different location. So let's say that we wanted this square that we drew at, say, the center point is 2, 2, right? We wanted it to rotate around that, right? So when we call translate, and we would say translate 2, 2, what we do is we move this origin point down here, and so this then becomes 0, 0, right? And then we've got an imaginary grid that extends out on these two dimensions. So this becomes our new 1, our new 2, our new 3, etc. Right, 1, 2, 3. But back in like our regular sketch, we still have this idea of 0, 0. And so what if we were to, that's 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So now what we would do is we would say draw our square at 0, 0, apply our rotation, and then the rotation happens around this corner. So then this now rotates, boop, like that, right? And when we're done with it, we relocate the origin back up here. So it sounds a little bit confusing on paper. I'm going to show you an example in just a second, but it's always helpful to sort of see this drawn out, even if the drawing is kind of shitty. Welcome back to the studio view, or whatever this is, office view. So we were looking at my poor illustration of how we can translate the drawing grid from one location to another, the origin point of our drawing grid from one location to another. So this is going to be, in practice, how this actually works and why it would be useful. And I'll show you both a sort of like straightforward example, and then in the next video I'll show you maybe a little bit more practical example. So if we were to do something like, let's say we wanted to draw a rectangle and have it rotate around, right? We could say rect width divided by 2, divided by 2, there we go, height divided by 2, and then we'll say 100, 100, and we'll do rect mode center so that it draws in the exact center of the screen. Cool. Yeah. So there we go. Looks good. And there's a function called rotate, which applies to everything that follows it. So if I call rotate everything that is afterwards will be rotated, right? And so if I wanted to do rotate, and I'll create a variable called rotme, and rotate takes values in these things called radians, and radians go from 0 up to 2 pi, so that's 6.28 and change, right? So we can either do this in degrees or radians. I'll do it in radians first, and then we can take a look at it in degrees if everybody really wants to. There's a thing called angle mode that allows you to change it, just like rect mode allows you to change where the how a rectangle gets drawn, or ellipse mode changes how a circle gets drawn, right? Angle mode allows you to change between degrees and radians. By default, it's in radians. I'm going to stick with that just for the time being. Right? So I'm going to say let me equals 0.0, and then so we rotate, and then after every time that we rotate, I'm going to increment this by just a little bit. So rotme plus equals 0.001. Like I said, just a little bit. Little goes a long way here. Right? So if I save this, look at it go, right? It's rotating, but it's not spinning, right? It's just like slowly sliding off center. So what's happening is when we apply rotate, or any one of these transformations, it rotates from 0, 0. And so that becomes a real problem if we wanted to like have a whole bunch of things spinning around on screen, right? It'd all be spinning around this corner. Now you'll notice this is now gone off the screen. It's not really gone. It's just it's like over here right now. And it's going to make this big wide arc, and then eventually it'll come back here. So if we want this thing to actually move around the center of the thing that we're drawing, what we need to do is we need to call this thing called translate. And translate takes 2 arguments, and those arguments are where you want it to move to, where you want the new origin point to be, right? So if I say width divided by 2, height divided by 2, and what'll happen now is the new origin point for my sketch is now here. So if I were to run this again, the rectangle would actually initially be drawn like way over here. So what I want to do is I want to move the rectangle's origin to 0, 0. Now when I save this, we get a very slow rotating square. I'm going to make that go a little bit quicker. There we go. So now we've got this thing that's just slowly spinning in space, but it's spinning on its own, right? If I wanted more than just this, we're going to run into a little bit of a problem. So like if I wanted to have a second rectangle in here, and I said rect, we'll make it like, it's going to be 100, 100, 50, 50. So it's a little bit smaller, located off to the side. But look, it now rotates too. So what we want to do is we're going to use these other things called push and pop. What push and pop does is it pushes the code that follows out of the drawing stack and then pops it back in. So all of the stuff that happens, locally and isn't applied to the rest of the sketch. This translate right here gets applied to the entire sketch, right? Which makes it hard to sort of like manage. So what we would do is we would say something like push and then pop. Pop. There we go. Now you can see everything that's between this push and this pop happens on its own. It's separate from the rest of the sketch, right? And so like this is just hanging out here. And if I wanted to, I could get this to rotate independently. So maybe I do a push, translate 100, 100, and then I'll do a rotate, we'll say rotate me times 2. So it'll go faster. And then we can say here we need to reset this origin to 0, 0. And we say pop and put it back into its place. And I did it again. I add that I all the time, apparently. That's my thing. Oh, there we go. So you'll notice also this is now spinning around its corner, and that's because the rect mode right here is center. And by default, the rect mode is corner, right? So I can just move this out. I should be able to move this out into my main sketch. Save it. There we go. So rect mode gets applied to everything now. It's not just inside of here. You can think of this as like a sidebar almost. But my little guy is spinning twice as fast as that big one. Everybody's happy. I'll show you how this can be applied to sketches when you're using many things. I'll be incorporating some of the stuff with functions. It'll be a really groovy time. So stick around for that. It'll be up next.